Hey guys, Brandon Johnson here again. Thanks for joining me. Today I wanted to talk about cross-picking. Cross-picking is one of those things that guitar players have probably heard of. Some guitar players probably know how to do it. Other guitar players maybe have never heard of it. But I just wanted to give you an introduction to cross-picking. What is it? How do you do it? How do you apply it to songs? So when I first started playing guitar, I kind of had the distinction between lead playing and rhythm playing. And that's kind of how I started my guitar playing career, was by learning how to solo. And then eventually I filled in the gaps with chord theory, and I learned how the chords and the scales are connected. And when I started to get into bluegrass guitar, flat picking style guitar, I started to develop my cross picking with my right hand. And basically cross picking is sort of in between lead playing and rhythm playing. It's kind of in the middle of those two. And it's definitely not lead. You're not taking a solo, but it's not pure strumming either. It's sort of somewhere in between. So what I thought I'd do is I'll show you two chords, just an F chord and a C chord. Okay, and I'll just show you those two chords, and I'll give you two examples of how you might apply cross picking to those two chords. And then we'll play those two chords together, and I'll show you kind of how you might cross pick a chord progression. So let's take a look at a couple examples. Okay, so when we talk about cross picking, we're talking specifically about your right hand or your strumming hand. Regardless of whether you're right or left-handed, it doesn't really matter, but cross picking is really something that you do with your right hand. Your left hand stays the same. It's just standard fingerings, but your right hand is really where the magic happens with cross picking. So, if you watch the greats, Brian Sutton, Tony Rice, Norman Blake, those guys are cross picking masters. And they each kind of have their own technique and their own approach to it. But one thing I've kind of adopted over the years is sort of the Tony Rice style of cross picking, which is more in the fingers. Where you watch Brian Sutton. Brian Sutton is more in the wrist. It looks like he's kind of got more of a wrist action with his cross picking, which is fine. Either technique is good, but I've come to kind of do it with my fingers. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you look at your right hand, you've got your thumb and your index finger holding the pick, and if you kind of move it like this, you can kind of see that I'm kind of moving my thumb, but there's a lot of range of motion right there just in your fingertips, right? Whereas with your wrist, you can create that same range of motion with your wrist, but to me that seems like a lot of work to me. I like to kind of anchor with my right hand. I like to anchor my pinky on the pick guard right there, and I like to use my fingers more for the cross picking. And to me, that's just easier. It's more easy to control that way for me. Sometimes I'll even put my palm down on the bridge so that it's anchored. And the wrist is still moving, but really the cross picking is done with the fingers. And if you watch Tony Rice up close, you can see that's what he's doing. He's using his fingers a lot, his thumb and his index of the picking hand, to do a lot of the cross picking. So now I'll give you an example here real quick. I'll do an F to a C. So just a simple F chord. But in this case, I'm going to play it like this, which is kind of the Norman Blake, easy F chord shape. And then the C chord. So when we talk about cross picking, the reason it's called cross picking is because you're picking across strings. So you're skipping strings. Whereas with normal strumming, you're kind of strumming all the strings all at once. Like normal strumming would be like this. You can see how I'm strumming all the strings, and I'm not differentiating the notes at all. And a cross-picking pattern for that exact same chord, for the F chord, might sound something like this. So I'm still strumming. I'm still integrating strums in there, but the cross picking comes in. You could cross pick a C chord kind of the same way, so you're still going to be strumming, but you're going to be integrating some cross pick. So it might sound like this. So you can see there, I'm still doing some downstrokes, some open strum downstrokes, but I'm also integrating that alternating bass note. So if you're looking at the F chord, for example, an F chord played out of this position, you could definitely cross pick that, so it would sound something like this. Or you could play a more simplified F chord like this, which is kind of like an F major 7 if you play that open E. That makes it F major 7, but if you leave that open E off, and just play that, it's kind of like a triad, like an F triad. So one cool thing you could do there is you can kind of do that. Okay, so when you go back and forth, let's say you're going back and forth between F and C, and you're starting off with that kind of simplistic F triad here, which lends itself really well to cross picking because it's a simple fingering. So you can add some half steps in there. You can go. And then you go to the C. When you go to the C, you can add the alternating bass note in there, and you can kind of do a little hammer on with your middle finger on that D string 2nd fret. So we're in the C chord position here. So now let's look at going back and forth between F and C in a cross picking style. So I'm going to go from F to C, just back and forth, and I'm going to cross pick it. So I'm going to use alternating bass notes. I'm going to use half step stuff, I'm going to use a little half step note there. And I'm also going to use hammer-ons on the C chord. So a good way to practice this is start with a really simple pattern. So start with a simple cross-picking pattern. So take your open C chord shape, and you can play something like this. I'll start off real slow, and I'll increase the speed as I go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Another good cross-picking pattern you can do is you can integrate the alternating bass note. So the alternating bass note for C is your G. So it'd sound like this. And you can see that I'm using my ring finger for the bass note, or if it's easier for you, you can play it like this. Okay, but that would sound, if we break that down, it would sound something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. and you can do that with the F too. If you're going to do the F alternating bass note, it might sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you want to learn more about cross-picking and if you want to watch some of the masters, check out Tony Rice, Brian Sutton. David Greer is a cross-picking genius. David Greer, Grier. So he's definitely worth checking out. You can also check out my website, BrandonJohnsonGuitar.com, for more lessons.